In the age of the internet, it's very easy to accidentally destroy your reputation with just a couple careless comments or poorly reasoned arguments, and it's undeniably the most powerful tool that the public has ever had access to, but very few people use it correctly or with any kind of strategy at all. In a world where most aspects of your life will find their way online one way or another, either through you posting them directly or someone else, it's essential to be equipped to handle the echo chambers, the anonymity, your reputation, time deliberately spent offline and grounded in the real world, and so on. Today we are joined by Joss Edwards to discuss exactly that, as well as skepticism, faith, emotional regulation and availability as a man, and much more. I'm your host, Gabriel Schickler, and welcome to the Operation Paragon podcast. Like I mentioned before we started recording here, the first thing I'm really curious to hear about is, your journey in developing your worldview, your approach to life, and just generally how these past few years have gone to you, because, much like me, you're a pretty deep thinker. You like to dive into topics, draw your own conclusions. And so I'm just curious, for myself and the listeners, what has been, the general flow of your life up to this point, and what have been those, what would you say would be the most important lessons that you picked up along the way?
Well, the time of my life from when I started the account I've got now to my current place in this world is pretty extreme. I don't want to say a complete U-turn, but I imagine the follower base that I had when I started, if they listened to the sort of stuff that I agree with now, I don't think they get angry, but they probably unfollow. Yeah, so in 2020, I was quite degenerate and, smoking weed all the time, going out, doing drugs, partying. The kind of stereotypical doomer mindset. Do people still use that term? I've been off the internet for so long.
Not as much, but yes.
Well, hopefully they'll know what I mean then. But yeah, so I was, down in all of that sort of lifestyle. And in 2021, went on the internet one day, think I was looking for boobs on Instagram, and I came across this. What was his name? Sobra, I think it was. Do you remember that guy?
Yep. Yeah, he's still around.
Yep,
I
he's
think I
still
think
around.
he's done a face reveal now too, so people actually know who he is.
Oh wow, that's
Mm-hmm.
we got Sobra face reveal for
Yeah.
GTA 6. Crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was scrolling and I just came across him one day, and I don't know, it was like the switch just flipped in me, and I start scrolling through his account, and I'm like, wow, I should eat steak, I should summon a sack, and get jacked. It was a fairly simple message for someone who was, feeling down in life, feeling like, oh fuck, I'm gonna be stacking shelves at the local supermarket for the rest of my life. Maybe I'll get a girlfriend. She'll probably hate me. She'll probably want to bang other dudes. And then we might have kids. My kids will hate me too. Awesome. So I was kind of at that point in life. So I was like, you know what? Screw it. I might as well just fuck about and party
Mm-hmm.
for the young years of my life. But yeah, so I saw that account and suddenly I started changing. And I lost a lot of friends very quickly
Mm.
because when you go through that radical of a change, you kind of are forced to just drop people out of your life that are holding you back. And the friends I had at the time were still people that I call quite good friends today, but in the moment, I think the best thing for me, which
Mm-hmm.
is advice that I'd give to a lot of younger guys that were in the same position as I was, you just have to drop them.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter if they're really close to you, just if they're tethering you to that lifestyle and enabling you to just continue doing that. And by enabling, I mean
Mm-hmm.
making a safe space for that to be an acceptable thing. Like socially, doing drugs every single day is not acceptable. But you
Mm-hmm.
find yourself a group of friends that do that every day, suddenly it's normal and social norms kind of go out the window.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But yeah, so I just cut those guys off. Still really good friends to this day. But yeah, and then I just went off into the forest and just thought really, really hard, which was the first time in my life that I'd done thinking to that level. And I just reevaluated my life up until that point. What am I doing? Where did it go wrong? And I just sat with myself for a really long time and just thought, because I know that a lot of people on the internet say that the more you think, the less you do, and that thinking is inaction. You just need to take action. I agree with that to some extent, but
Mm-hmm.
you really need to figure out who you are first and what the reason is behind why you've got to the point you're at. Just going to the gym and eating steak and selling your knapsack is not going to automatically fix that problem. It's going to make your general life quality better, but
Mm-hmm.
to be honest, you really just need to sit and think
Yeah, because
until eventually you come to some conclusion.
any of those things are just tools or means to an end. They're not necessarily an end in themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, like, you can have those tools, and those tools are amazing. They'll help
Mm-hmm.
you build the most magnificent temple you can imagine. But you need to be strong enough to actually pick that hammer up in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be strong enough to chisel into the marble and actually get the structure looking all pretty.
100%.
So, yeah, I went through that phase and then I started the account that I'm on now, which was originally Neolibertate, but I changed the name because it has quite a few negative connotations to it
Mm,
in social circles that I'm in for reasons that we probably won't delve into in this podcast.
that's perfectly fine.
Yeah. So I started that account and I was quite young at the time. I still wonder if 16-year-old me having that sort of influence, like, it was only a few thousand followers, but having that sort of influence that young, I do still wonder to this day if it was something that I should have had,
Mm,
because I was quite angry at the world and I was quite bitter because obviously I'd been conditioned into thinking that all of my bad habits, like watching porn, eating junk food, being inactive for 12 plus hours a day, and all that stuff was completely acceptable, completely normal, which in modern society is common, but for the human body, that's not normal.
mm-hmm.
It's very far removed from nature. So I was quite
And
angry
and
at
you
the
think it
world.
was social media that was that catalyst that really got that started for you?
That got what? That got me out of that cycle or into that cycle?
Both.
Ooh. I was given unrestricted internet access at
Mm,
far too young of an age. I think like 8 years old. I was about 7 when I picked up my dad's iPad for the first time and typed in female boobs or just like girl boobies or some silly shit like that.
mm-hmm.
And then from there, yeah, just a downward spiral of technology just slowly eating away at the soul. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really, really big thing. I talked to some of my friends that weren't given internet access until they were about 13, 14. The way that they grew up was completely different to the way I grew up. They don't
Mm-hmm.
have the same vices, they don't have the same mental health issues. They're not grappling with the sort of, they're normal people, basically.
Mm-hmm.
They're how humans should exist. And if you grow up with unrestricted internet access, you become very far removed from what a normal person actually is,
Mm-hmm.
which is why we've got all of these internet buzzwords and these groups like incels or red pillars.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of any others, but you get the gist.
Yeah, you build almost like a fake tribe or a fake identity as opposed to placing yourself in the context of the world around you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why we grow up with so many of these extreme views
Mm-hmm.
because people are given internet far too young and they don't socialize properly. So instead of going out into the world and meeting real people, they find their tribe on the internet, like you
Mm-hmm.
said. And suddenly they're in an echo chamber and all of their views are just being bounced back and forth on each other. And it seems objectively right when you're in the middle of that echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
But ever since I've been out of it and away from social media, I've got a lot of realizations that some of the stuff that I was viewing on social media, like on our side of the internet,
Hmm.
brilliant. It's helpful, fitness advice, financial advice, education, philosophy, all that stuff. But then there's the darker side, which I feel like is not discussed as much. I read
Hmm.
some of your posts a couple of weeks ago about influencers. I can't remember the gist of it, but
Mm.
internet gurus, that was it.
Oh
Yeah, like
yeah.
people will take these internet gurus, like Andrew Tate, for example, and their word is gospel. What they're saying is it's the truth because, they've got the car, they got the girl, they got the house, the money.
Hmm.
So from there, they'll be conditioned into these little subgroups, and they'll stop seeing the world for what it really is. Suddenly, women act this way, men act this way, and it's just black and white. There's no nuance in
Hmm.
between it, and it can be really dangerous because, I mean, just today at work, I've already met who I'd probably call an incel, and it was crazy to actually see that manifest itself in real life because I've never actually met someone
Hmm.
aside from myself that has been completely conditioned by the internet, and to see that manifest itself in an actual human
Yeah.
that is talking to me about all of these buzzwords, terms, stuff that they've read online that they're taking as objective fact.
Hmm. Yeah,
it
that's
was
that's a really
it
good
was
point.
quite difficult. Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, sorry, man. I thought you were gonna lead up with something,
Oh
but
yeah, I was just gonna say, um, that's a really good point because a lot of the people kind of in the self improvement space, things like that, will tell they're following, and rightly so, that you shouldn't pay attention to the news because it's all incentivized to keep you thinking defensively. Because if you have a headline that says the weather is going to be great tomorrow, you're like, oh, I got all the information I need. If you have a headline that says there's a category 2 hurricane heading toward you, you need to be prepared, look inside for more information. That's what incentivizes people to keep up with it. And if they're in this reactionary mode, and if you're constantly looking for threats and things that aren't right, then you're much more likely to consume that information. And so I think it's very good for people not to be caught up in the news cycle too much. But the funny thing is, like you're saying, very often we go to the exact opposite extreme, where instead
mm,
of the news media or whatever, then you're just cherry picking, um like, oh, like there was this robbery or this shooting or whatever, um and like you're saying, you build that bubble and you're convinced that the entire world exists in this context, and you don't really
mm.
think anything of it because it seems true. But then, like you said, you meet somebody that actually thinks completely through that ideological lens, and you're like, this is so ungrounded in anything that's real. It's like, yeah, like maybe everything that you're presenting that actually happened and is actually based in fact, but that doesn't mean that it establishes a pattern or a regularity or anything like that.
Yeah, man, I completely agree. Like, you get so entrapped by social media that you start projecting it onto people that you meet. And I definitely
Hmm.
had this issue for a while. It was quite bad. I was reading a lot of red pill stuff, like women act this way.
Hmm.
Women will. I'll try and get an example. Um, okay, women will are very emotional creatures. So if you can elicit emotions from them, whether negative or positive, they will like you more. So if you are a bad boy and elicit
Mm.
negative emotions but string it with positive ones, you'll get the girl.
Hmm.
And I'd read something like that, and immediately I'd be like, okay, that's how I view women now. And when you're reading stuff like that on the internet, it really manifests in all of your relationships. Suddenly,
Hmm.
you're not just some person that is viewing other people as people. You're viewing people as the ideology that you've read on the internet, like you said.
Hmm.
and it dehumanizes all of our relationships, and well, it just ostracizes us from society, and
Hmm.
that further pushes us into being in these online spheres,
Yeah.
which is just a vicious cycle.
Yeah, and the thing that's so interesting to me about this entire conversation is that it's very easy to get politically just absolutely divided. So, like in the United States, for example, ever since Roe v. Wade was overturned, abortion is an incredibly contentious issue because now it's a states' rights
Mm,
thing. Some places have banned it, some places haven't, and both sides are trying to push right now to get that federal, jurisdiction to just have blanket permission or a blanket ban for it. Um,
no,
and you look at something like that, and people on both sides will get very passionate about it, and rightly so. I mean, I being a Catholic, I think that it is a moral issue, and you can't just allow that to happen unrestricted or permitted
mm,
at all. Um, but that's an example where people get super passionate about it, and they make it their entire personality and their entire worldview, and they're willing to look at the other side as just being stupid, or they're all animals, or they're tyrants, or whatever the case may be. And then you talk to your next door neighbor who might not agree with you on this particular topic, and you realize, oh, they're a human too. They have opinions too.
yeah,
And it takes all of the well, not all of the animus out of it, but it takes a large degree of that passion out of it, because you're not connecting on just one issue, and you also don't have this shield of either anonymity or distance where you can feel safe and insulated from what you say. It's like, if I piss off my neighbor, that's someone that I'm going to live next to for at least a few years, that I'm going to have to figure out a way to work with that. So
mm.
powerful. In terms
Yeah,
of
man, anonymity is crazy. I was having a discussion with my mate the other day. Instagram comments and
They are
like
cancer, dude. Oh my gosh.
it's absurd. It's genuinely like it started off kind of funny. It's like, an obviously satire account
Yeah.
with, say, a 16-year-old kid and his
Hmm.
mum. They're doing a satire bit that's obviously satire, and the comments will be like, "Your son sold me drugs behind a dumpster," and it's like, it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then you get to one of the ones that I was discussing with my mate recently is this fairly sweet girl that's just making dad jokes on the internet,
Mm.
and it's clearly not satire. It's genuinely just her wanting to be funny in her own way,
Hmm.
and the comments are just. I won't repeat them because they honestly are vile, but the shield of anonymity that Instagram and an anonymous profile gives to these people,
Hmm.
it's so dangerous because you can apply that, you can take that and then you can create a following with that, like I
Yeah.
did in the past. I didn't actively go on my way to, make it a negative thing, but
Hmm.
with that shield of anonymity, you can say whatever you want and face no
Yeah.
repercussions. Ever
Yeah.
since I revealed my identity on Instagram, I realized that I was being a lot more cautious with what I was saying. And
Hmm.
instead of just being completely consumed by internet culture, I was suddenly thinking, okay, how is this going to reflect in my own community?
Hmm.
I was suddenly thinking about the people around me because I didn't have the protection of being a faceless identity. And I think, like with Soulbrath, for example, he didn't reveal his face for a long while.
Yeah.
And that's a huge, like, suddenly you reveal your face and you become a person instead of just the ideology that you're preaching.
Hmm.
And it makes a big difference to the way that you interact online. Like, a huge advice I'd give to young men would be, don't be anonymous on the internet,
Hmm.
because you might say something stupid and that is the risk. But it means that you are less likely to do so in the first place because you don't have, like I said, that shield to
Hmm.
protect you. So suddenly you stop you stop being so consumed by internet culture and you suddenly start living
Hmm.
with, hmm, people I know are going to see this. So I'm actually going to take into account their thoughts and feelings
Hmm.
rather than screw up. I can just post whatever I want.
Yeah, yeah, that's so important. So you mentioned that, earlier you said you've taken quite a lot of time away from social media, gotten a lot of space. So with that perspective of being, I dare say, more grounded in the real world and actual reality, I view social media as a tool, much like we were saying earlier with, working out and all these other things. It's a means to an end. It's not something that's inherently good or bad by itself. Now, social media is specifically potentially dangerous because it's engineered to hold your attention. And if it can get you passionate and angry about something and, typing out paragraphs in the comments section, that's going to get a lot more user time on the platform than if you just have everything you agree with, right? Or things that you can't get passionate about, either in the positive or the negative sense. So what I'm wondering is, with your perspective of both being on the internet and being off of it, do you believe that there is an extent to which we can use these things appropriately? And if so, how would one go about setting up those boundaries and just getting their mind right? So, they're using it, they're getting a benefit out of it, whether it's getting more information, building a business, um, just establishing their resume right so they're more visible for future employers, things like that. What would you say would be those guiding principles to, like you were saying, build in that accountability and really have something that's going to present yourself well to the world and also not consume your life behind the scenes?
Realize that your social media presence might as well be your resume. It might as well be your CV that you're showing to
Mm,
employers because the way that technology is going, your digital footprint is going to more or less become your identity.
yeah.
I would hope that it won't be like we were discussing before we started, to the extent where, the government is dredging up something you said on WhatsApp 10 years ago that
Hmm.
was probably racist, but at the time was funny because 10 years ago we had slightly different attitudes.
Hmm.
So realize that everything you do on the internet is going to be viewed by someone at some point and it's going to shape their worldview about you.
Hmm.
So many people that I know in real life, their entire perception of me is based on neoliberty. When they think
Mm.
of me, they think of this guy on the internet that's spouting a load of bullshit. And I've been trying to get away from that, but even I think when I stopped posting was over a year ago. It
Yeah,
was
it was
about
sometime
January.
early mid 2023, I think.
Yeah, I think it was early. It was around January time. But yeah, I stopped posting over a year ago, and even today, I'm still meeting people that I don't know, but they know me quite
Really?
intimately. Mm.
Wow.
No, obviously that's only because I revealed my identity and
Hmm.
chose not to stay anonymous. But like I said before, with the way technology is going, even if you do choose to stay anonymous, somehow it's probably going to be linked back to you. So be careful with what you do on the internet. I took it for granted. I thought that I'd be safe. Honestly, I've gotten lucky, but I should I should probably have a lot worse. People should probably have a lot worse perception of me than they do,
Yeah.
just because of, some of the stuff that I said on the internet.
Yeah.
Because if you're on the internet, you're going to slip up, you're going to make a mistake, you're going to write something that perhaps at the time your emotions are guiding you to say that, but
Hmm.
then when you look back on it, you're like, oh, I worded that terribly, and people are going to think that I am biggest raging misogynist on the planet, even if you aren't. So
Yeah.
yeah, first thing would be act like it's your resume. Like
Hmm.
everything you do is your CV.
Yeah.
And then the
That's
second thing would be definitely app trackers, like, lot stuff that you can use to actively lock yourself out of, say, Instagram or
mm,
Snapchat or something, and stuff that's actually helping you on the internet. A
hmm.
lot of people will have Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, games, 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 and then I don't know, DoorDash on quick open, and that's it.
Yeah.
And right now, I don't actually have any useful apps apart from stuff that I can use to track my savings, my spendings, financial stuff.
Hmm.
But I used to have stuff like sleep apps, stuff that would lock me out of Instagram, stuff that helped me with life on my phone.
Hmm.
Something that my father always bangs on about is if you gave a phone to ancient Egyptians, it would be like giving the hand of God to them. It genuinely, there's just this device that sits in your hand. You can use it to search anything, anything in the
Hmm.
whole world. But here we are using it to watch TikToks of Sheen factory workers with Taylor Swift music videos
Hmm.
overlaying them. So realize that your phone is a tool. It's something that can be used to greatly benefit your life, to help you save money, to help you invest, to help you track your fitness goals, to help you sleep even.
Hmm. Yeah, not to mention access to a level of information that is completely unprecedented throughout human history. Like I think back
Oh
even
yeah.
to when my dad was, doing book reports and things for school in the like the 80s, for example, pre-internet. You had to go to the library, you had to find relevant books, you had to bring them home with you, search through them. Oh,
Man,
this isn't what I'm looking
I
for.
couldn't even imagine doing that
Yeah.
now, going
And
to a library to find all of that specific
and the thing
information.
that's insane about that too is that you might not even find what you need at your library because it might not have the appropriate catalog or the appropriate information for you depending on where you live.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, now we have access to the entirety of human history. Like you want to read a copy of the Iliad or the Odyssey, you can find a PDF for that, and everything
You want to
since
read
then.
Industrial Society in its future? You can find a
And
PDF on that too.
maybe in a Telegram chat.
Yeah, make sure you have VPN on when you do that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. One thing you were saying about building the uh, building your presence as a resume. It reminded me of a Warren Buffett quote where he says it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. Because
Oh yeah.
yeah, and that's the same thing when you think about like building anything versus destroying it. Like it takes, I mean, obviously with modern mechanics, you can build a car in not too long, but it takes thousands of different pieces, dozens of different materials, all in a very precise, intricate way, and it can take a conveyor belt line, a day or more to delicately assemble this. You can wreck your car by wrapping it around a tree in about 10 seconds. You just need to accelerate enough, and it's that same principle. Are you at all familiar with Alex Hormozy?
Alex remote. No, I'm not.
Okay, he is a first generation uh, immigrant in America, and he has a gym. Well, he started as a gym owner, and he's built his way up, and he's a super ambitious and now successful businessman. But he was talking on this video that I saw with him a while back about how when he was in college, he just partied it up. He was an absolute degenerate, all these different things. And he got out and he started taking his life seriously, getting into business, trying to get his act together. And for like a decade after he'd done that, people still looked at him the same way. They're like, oh, it's Alex the party guy. And it wasn't until he had stacked wins again and again and again over years and years and years that finally that perception of him changed. Um, so that just kind of speaks to how important it is not to like beat yourself up if you do screw up, but to not get caught up in the uh, um, I guess the French phrase isn't really useful here, but like the spirit of the times, like a zeitgeist or anything like that, and actually think about
Yeah.
what you're thinking, what you're trying to express, and then how to do that charitably. Because another way to really screw up your life is to say genuinely what you mean, but only have it over text. Because I forget the exact statistics, but I think 77% of what we mean to say is in the words themselves, and the rest of it is body language, inflection, tone, the gestures that you make, eye contact, things like that. And a lot of these things that just cannot be communicated over a text. So you might say
Oh
something
yeah,
in a
man.
perfectly stable frame of mind, but then somebody is in a different mood or they think you're angry with them and they read it in an entirely different way. And then that can blow up. Like I had a uh I had a meme page that I was running um for some
Nice.
yep. No, I was running a meme page when I was in college. And it was just like it was just a fun little time to screw around. It was faceless for a while too.
Yeah.
I was just kind of messing around, but there was one day I committed the capital offense of sharing and I was occasionally I would go on little rants about like, being a good man or, Christianity, all these different things,
Yeah.
subversion of the church, all these things. Um, but I committed the capital offense of sharing a post about how women can make themselves attractive to men and find
Oh,
a good
buddy.
guy. Yeah, and the thing was, that post said the horribly untrue thing that generally out of shape women are not attractive. And that was complete anathema. And it blew up. I
Oh,
got a ton of hate for it. And I ended up having to completely rebrand the page because people
yep.
complained to the school. And it's one of those things where it's like, I didn't think this would be a big deal at all. Like, I wasn't trying to ruffle any feathers. I wasn't trying to piss anybody off, but it just exploded. And I was shocked because it's like, okay, like, sure,
Yeah. Oh, I've been
be
there, done
mad.
that.
This is a faceless meme page. Like if you're
Yep.
if you're taking what I'm saying on a faceless meme page seriously, you need to reconsider everything that you're doing in life. Because
Yeah.
like I am the last, like I'm just talking about things that interest me. I'm the last person qualified to actually authoritatively speak on these things, but people take themselves so seriously nowadays that it's so difficult to do that.
I guess it's yeah. I guess it's because people are just so absorbed with the internet
Yeah.
that, and also that they don't have much actually going on in
Hmm.
their own lives. So, something like that gets around your school or your work, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden it's a big thing. It's like, yo, man, this meme page said that fat women are ugly.
Hmm.
Wow, this is like Israel Gaza part two. Crazy.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the thing though. Like you said, you didn't think it was that deep. You
Hmm.
didn't think, you just said, personally, I don't find fat girls attractive.
Hmm.
And that's, I'm gonna be careful with my words here. I'm gonna say that's a fairly reasonable thing to say based on
Hmm.
your own personal preference. You
Yeah.
personally do not like fat women. Fair
Hmm.
enough. But when you say it on the internet, it's so easy for that
Yeah.
personal preference and personal opinion to be taken as you saying something objective.
Yep.
You saying, personally, I don't like fat women. Suddenly, you
Hmm.
put that on the internet and it translates to all fat women are ugly. Just
Yeah.
end stop.
Or even worse, you get like, like, oh, you're like dehumanizing me, um, invalidating my lived experience. You get all these things, and it's like, no, that's not what I was saying at all. But
Yeah,
yeah,
man. I
and
mean, I remember I had a couple of bad posts, and
mhm.
it resulted in one of terrible post, which actually that's probably one of the reasons that I stopped posting so much.
Was just because
What
just you didn't want to handle the reaction to things.
genuinely, yeah, like I'll admit it, I was
Hmm.
too much. I was too scared to face up to the consequences of what I'd said on the internet, because everything you say on the internet is your responsibility.
Hmm.
It's doesn't matter what it is, even if you just repost a meme, it's your responsibility.
Hmm.
But yeah, there were a few stories where I was posting it as here's what I think, which is a good way to go about saying things on the internet. Never ever say this is objective fact. Women
Hmm.
are like this, men are like this, black people are like this, white people are like this.
Hmm.
Never say anything is objective fact because the world is not objective in 99% of things. Like,
Hmm.
you say something on the internet, you need to phrase it as personally, I think this, based on experiences I've had, and then you always need to put a disclaimer. This might not be true. It's just an experience that I'm sharing.
Mm-hmm.
say, even with basic stuff like health advice, I see so many of me and my girlfriend were talking about just the other night, like so many raw meat advocates and carnivore diet advocates
Oh yeah.
are saying, like, this is the way. This is how you will cure your IBS. This is how you will fix your gut issues.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's the way that you fixed your gut issues. The way that someone else might fix their gut issues is
Yeah,
completely different.
that's
Their
so
diet might
important.
consist of bread and it fixes it. But yeah, you say something on the internet objectively, and you get two responses. You get people that are going to take it as absolute gospel, as
Mm-hmm.
fact, and they're going to believe it to a T, even without any supported research. Or you're going to get people that are having a very, very nasty reaction to it.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that gets even worse when you get into things like the health space is you can find a study that will support literally any position you want, including contradictory ones. Like,
Oh, man.
we both got coffees before we hopped on here. You can find some coffees that or some studies that will say coffee reduces cancer risk and some that will say it increases cancer risk. And it's like, well, who are you going to believe? They're both experts, they've got the certifications, they both took the grant money or whatever to conduct these searches. And one of the things that you said that is so important is that, and this is something I've said in the past too, anytime people are trying to give advice, they are simply telling you what worked for them. So
Mm,
what worked for them might not work for you if you come from a different background, if you have different opportunities. Now, it generally, like if somebody is where you want to go in life, it's a good idea to take their advice because they can at least give you pointers that will parallel your own path, assuming you're trying to get to the exact same place. But maybe you should not be taking marriage advice from the guy that's been divorced 3 times. um, but people don't consider these things because it's like, well, this guy, he makes a lot of money or whatever, so he must be an expert in everything. But at the end of the day, great, it worked for you, it might not work for me. And dairy is an excellent example of this because some people
mm,
react really well to dairy and it's a wonderful thing to have in their diet, and others it leads to inflammation. It upsets their stomach and gives them gut issues, and so they're better off not eating it. And you can find studies
mm.
both ways that say, you need to be, uh, you know, drinking raw milk or whatever. And some will say, oh, you need like 2% or skim milk or whatever. And some will say, no, you shouldn't touch dairy at all. And I mean, let's assume that, like, there aren't any vegan arguments or whatever in here, but it's like an actual scientific observation of the effect on, the human body, energy levels and things like that. But it's all very personal. And like you said, the problem with the internet is that it will make sweeping assertions, even if the original person doesn't intend it to be taken that way.
No.
That will just be taken as gospel truth. But yeah, so to kind of bring things back to your story and your personal development and everything like that. So um, yeah, so you were on social media, just kind of diving into things. I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about your faith journey because you converted to Catholicism a few months back, and like you said, you were anything but in that position just a few years prior. So what did that journey look like for you?
It was. It started off with the takeoff of the solar sphere. I don't know if you remember that or not,
Oh yes.
but yeah,
Yeah, I actually had a
canon event
very
for the internet.
yeah, I actually had a very interesting conversation with a guy in that space just a couple of weeks ago.
Mm,
But I dare say most people that just kind of blindly follow these ideologies are not as well spoken or rational as he was. Um, but,
yeah, I find that a lot. Yeah,
uh-huh.
but yeah, so it started with that, and I remember I was kind of getting into paganism, not like hugely, but
Hmm.
I suddenly had I'd fixed my health pretty much, and all of a sudden I was feeling like Rene Descartes coined it as the trademark argument. He says that all humans have an inbuilt urge to believe in God.
Hmm.
And I believe that there is that innate faith urge. And the way that manifests itself in modern society is with, say, Taylor Swift becoming a god.
Mm-hmm.
But I suddenly felt that innate urge, and I needed something to worship. So here I am in some random farmer's field, picking up stones, making a solar cross, that like X marks the spot with a circle around it. I was
I've
lifting
seen
the
those,
stones and
yeah.
just placing them. Yeah, and I was just placing them, and I was like, "Witness me, son. I have placed rocks in a formation." The sun's just, making my skin feel hot.
You didn't get the
But it
blessings of
started.
Odin or anything?
Oh no, no, no! Thor's hammer
Tragic.
came right to my hand, and suddenly I wielded the power of thunder. But no, but I started that, and I kind of worked around trying to find what faith actually meant to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day I just picked up a Bible because there's a very controversial view that I hold on religion that is not Catholic.
Mm.
And I'm sure extremists would probably lynch me for it. And even normal people, like normal Catholics, would heavily disagree. But the way I came to the Catholic faith was I could never wrap my head around the idea that there's just one faith that is objectively correct, because all of these different faiths around the world are more or less saying the same thing, just in different ways. Like, say, Islam or Hinduism or
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, any religion which believes in one God, and Hinduism does, it has Brahma is
Brahma,
the one God.
yeah.
Yeah. And I wasn't studying them heavily, but I was doing my research on all these different religions because like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I get to pick and choose. Awesome. Not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time I was thinking, all right, which one sounds the most logical? They all more or less say the same thing. Be a good person, there is one God, get to heaven. Sweet. But after a while of that, it suddenly became clear that all of these religions were made by humans. Like the Prophet Muhammad. I really hope I don't say something that gets me burned at the stake here, but he was still a human. He sinned, and
Mm-hmm.
I might be wrong in saying this. I don't mean to offend anyone, but there's accounts of him having multiple wives and being a paedophile and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. And whilst I'm sure he was a stand-up guy, a brilliant person, he's still human. He still sinned, and there are accounts of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was hopping back and forth between all these religions, and then I came to Christianity and I picked up a Bible. And there's this one undeniable figure that so many eyewitness accounts have all confirmed, from people that hated him to people that loved him to people that were completely indifferent towards him, all accounted for the same thing. There was this man, Jesus, who walked the earth and he was perfect. No, I'm not saying that Jesus didn't fart and burp and do human things,
Mm-hmm.
because he was God, but he was also fully man.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't sin. He not lowered himself. He hung around with sinners, but instead of condemning the sin like the sinner, like so many religions do,
Mm-hmm.
where it's you're a bad person, so say in Hinduism, you've been a bad person, you've gained bad karma, so you're going to be reincarnated as a frog. Yippee.
Mm-hmm. And then if you're a good
No,
frog,
there
you might be
was
reincarnated as a person.
a crippled person with no eyes and no feet and no
Yeah.
legs. Awesome. But then you have this man, Jesus, and all of these eyewitness accounts are all saying the same thing. So it's undeniable that he lived and existed and was a real person and did, I would like to hope, all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll put a disclaimer: faith to me is the literal definition of the word. It's faith. I can never know if Jesus did all of these things. I can never know if he truly was perfect. I can never know if he truly was God. But I have faith that he did. I have faith that he did all of these things. But I'm not ignorant to the fact that it might not be true. However, like I said, I have the faith that it is. But yeah, so to swing back, I was reading the Bible and it made sense. It's I still viewed Christianity at the time as just another religion that was all like the rest. But Jesus, the man, was completely different. He
Hmm.
was completely set aside from all other figures in all other religions. And I thought, you know what? If there's anyone that I should follow, it's Jesus. It's not anyone else. It's this guy who has it all figured out, who
Hmm.
genuinely has it all figured out. Not like, his own personal experience. This is the one objective thing where you follow what he's saying and your life is better.
Hmm.
And I didn't fully believe in Christianity at the time, but I started to act as if I did, which is, I think, the route that Jordan Peterson took. He
Yep.
didn't fully believe in God,
It's
but he
Pascal's
acted
wager.
as, yeah, Pascal's wager. The the man who believes in God has nothing to lose, but the man who does not believe in God has everything to lose.
If he is real, yeah.
Yeah. So I started acting as if he was real. And all of a sudden, I'm reading the works of Jesus. I'm reading what he's saying a good person should do. And everything's just suddenly working out. Everything's going right for me. And not in a sort of vain, prideful way, like, oh, I'm getting all the money, I'm getting all the girls. In a sort of, I'm content with my life. I feel like I'm actually being a good person, and things are starting to work out. Whether that
Hmm.
was luck or divine intervention, I don't know. But from the way that it was so coincidentally perfect, I started
Hmm.
doing the things that this book was telling me. Things started going right. It just, it was too much to be luck. So all of
Hmm.
a sudden I'm here and I'm thinking, this is real. Like, obviously I had thought, okay, I might be going batshit crazy. There's the possibility that I'm projecting my faith onto the world
Creating like a
and
self-fulfilling prophecy type thing.
yeah, exactly that. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm being a good person, so things are going good. And I'm viewing things as good, even if they aren't. I
Hmm.
thought about that and I was like, it just didn't, it was a possibility to be sure, but I thought and I thought and I thought, and it just wasn't true.
Hmm.
There was so clearly some form of divine intervention. Something was working in my favor. And after that, I started going to church and reading more, became friends with my priest,
Hmm.
and eventually I got baptized last year, around this time actually. It was on Easter, the
Oh,
31st.
congratulations. Yeah, of course, of course.
And from there, I think the final push towards me fully believing in Catholicism was my baptism. I still had
Mm.
my doubts up until that point. I was still like, there may be no God. This might all be malarkey, and I'm
Hmm.
just schizophrenic and imagining this shit. But I got baptized, and I done a lot of bad things in life.
Hmm.
I genuinely felt saved, and not in the sort of, oh, I'm a perfect person, I'm morally good,
Hmm.
but in the sort of, I've gone into a shower and I've come out clean. The stuff that I've done is still with me, but I feel clean. And for me, that was the final push. It's just undeniable for me.
Yeah.
Now, I'm saying this is my subjective opinion because there's
Hmm.
so many people in the world right now that there's just not one iota of them that could bring themselves to believe in any higher power. And I
Hmm.
understand that. It's completely valid. Like, you've just had your family blown to pieces in front of you. What benevolent and loving God would do that? So I understand that, but subjectively,
Hmm.
it just seems to have worked out too perfectly for
Yeah.
me not to believe.
Yeah, that's really powerful, man. I mean, so, as I've said, I'm a Catholic too. One of the things that I have really come to believe over the past couple of years specifically is I just don't believe in luck, or if I can say that more precisely, I don't believe in random chance. I think that everything in
Mm,
life happens for one of two reasons. Either it's a consequence of some action we've taken, so it's an outcome, whether for good or for ill, or two, it's something that's meant to direct us in the right direction of where we're meant to go. So I believe that everything that happens, everything that we experience, is all put in our lives for a specific reason. I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into your view on faith because this is a fascinating topic for me. I was actually having a conversation over Instagram DMs about a week or so ago with a guy that was in the actually in like kind of the solar pagan type sphere, and
yeah,
we were talking about objective truth, and his big objection to Christianity is I can't I can't take things on faith, right? So kind of like the doubting Thomas, unless I put my hand into his side and the nail marks
yeah.
on his hands, I will not believe, that kind of thing. The reason that faith is such an interesting topic for me is because, in my view, it almost requires a suspension of the intellect because you have to say this is where the facts are pointing me, but you still need to bridge that gap yourself, right? So there's, I forget who it was, but there was somebody, I think he was actually arguing against some it might have been Descartes, some similar philosopher, where he was saying that the true skeptic would not get out of bed in the morning because he wouldn't know that the floor would really be there to catch him. And
Mm.
the thing that's really interesting to me about faith is that you can't, even if like you don't believe in God, you don't believe in a higher power or anything like that, it's almost impossible to function in the world if you don't believe that there is some sort of uh or rather if you
Some
don't,
reason that
yeah,
things work out for
yeah,
you.
some reason for it. And not only that, but you have to take some things for granted, like the idea
Oh
of
yeah.
first principles, where there are just things that are accepted as fact and you can't really argue against them. And one of the things that's really fascinating to me in pursuit of this is one of the reasons it's impossible, in my opinion, to take a completely materialistic, like there is nothing beyond us argument is first, we can all recognize that the intellect and the will aren't physically quantifiable. Like you can measure brain
Mm,
activity, but you can't put the mind in a jar or anything like that. It's an
yeah.
external power. But more than that, um, it's just like things you can't independently verify everything yourself. And then even then, you can't trust everything that your senses give you. We're wrong about things we perceive all the time. Like that's how magic tricks work. Somebody has a quarter in their hand and they make it disappear. The coin didn't disappear. Your senses were just deceived into it. And so it's like what I'm getting at with this whole spiel here is what you view the proper order of faith to be in your own life. Because there are some things that you, like I said, in my opinion, have to accept as fact without necessarily being able to physically verify them because you just can't function otherwise. But what's your take on that?
Circling back to Descartes in his meditations, I'll paraphrase everything that
Hmm.
he wrote in his meditations because they're long-winded and they're written quite fancifully. But
Yeah, I think of.
I believe it was in his first meditation where Descartes said, you put an oar in the water and it bends. The oar itself isn't bent, but your perception is seeing it as bent because of the
Mm,
refraction of light upon the water.
hmm.
And he basically goes on a long wind of skepticism about stuff like that. Like, how can I know that when I'm dreaming, and that's not real? And how can I know when I'm awake, that's not me dreaming? And he goes into the utmost of skepticism. He goes way, way down until he is completely removed from all reality.
Hmm.
And I'm sure everyone will know the cogito ergo sum. I think therefore I am. It's the one thing that he can be certain of. But for there to be something to perceive at all, even if it is fake, there has to be something that is providing the source of that perception. And he goes on to his evil demon argument, where all of this could be an illusion, and there's just some evil demon who's having a laugh up in some other plane of existence, and he's just force feeding me all of this reality just for shits and giggles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
I've got the meditations open in front of me right here. He has this one passage where he says, and further, as I sometimes think that others are in error respecting matters of which they believe themselves to possess a perfect knowledge, how do I know that I am not also deceived each time I add together 2 and 3, or the number of sides of a square, or form some judgment still more simple, if more simple indeed can be imagined? But perhaps deity has not been willing that I should be thus deceived, for he is said to be supremely good. If, however, it were repugnant to the goodness of a deity to have created me subject to the constant deceptions, it would seem likewise to be contrary to his goodness to allow me to be occasionally deceived, yet it is clear that this is permitted. So,
yeah, exactly that. But something that he comes to his trademark argument, like I mentioned earlier.
mm-hmm,
He's like, there is an innate urge within us to believe in God, and I can conceive of, say, a perfect circle.
mm-hmm,
So if I can conceive a perfect circle, then I can conceive of perfection itself. And what is perfection? Perfection is God. But
mm-hmm,
he claims that he has objectively found solid, concrete proof for God's existence,
mm-hmm.
but he hasn't. He's still taking it on faith. He's still basing his entire theory on faith,
Yeah, because
which
you even just have to
is where it all
trust.
comes apart.
Yeah,
There you
you
go.
I was going to say, even if you're not arguing specifically for God, if you're arguing for anything, you necessarily take by faith that logic is a guiding principle of the universe. In order to argue literally anything, you have to hold that there is something that is true and something that is false. And that in itself,
And then there's something holding that all together. There's something
exactly,
that's actually
an
providing
underlying
that logic.
structure. Yeah.
And I think, I don't want to say the proof for that, but the best evidence to support that is the fact that, we have logical principles, we have
Hmm.
mathematics, geometry that all works perfectly. And then if you base that in your own life, I'm walking and the particles that make up who I am are not falling through the floor through the other particles,
Mm.
which is a possibility, albeit it might as well be impossible. But
Yeah.
I think that in itself is proof that there is something that is stopping that from happening. There
Hmm.
is something that is binding all logic and all physics together that works perfectly for us. And then you take that and you apply it to more mundane things like just general life. I walk out in front of a road and, I don't get hit by a meteor. It doesn't just come
Hmm.
flying down on me. Or, I walk out of my house and I'm taking it on faith that I'm not going to get blown up by just a random collision of particles
Hmm.
exploding. You take all of
Yeah.
life on faith, whether or not you're atheist or theist. As much as atheists don't like to admit it, I'm sure,
Hmm.
every action they take is based on faith. Everything they do is based on, even if they're citing a scientific article, they're citing it as if it is
Hmm.
fact. They're still taking it on faith that that isn't, going full schizo here, some government funded conspiracy to
Hmm.
make people stop drinking raw milk. So they're taking all of this stuff on faith. And for me, the journey to actually holding faith in the first place was, life is a coin toss. It's a 50-50.
Hmm.
I'm either alive or I'm not. And life either has meaning or it doesn't. Now, if I abandon all faith, life has no meaning. Like, why am I here?
Hmm.
Why am I on this podcast with you? Why do I have a loving family, a loving spouse, a loving everything? Why do I bother with all of that? I
Hmm.
take it on faith that that love has meaning, and thus I take it on faith that all of life has meaning. And for me, if I'm already at that position where I'm basing everything in my life on faith, why is it so irrational to also base all of that on the faith that there is something that's giving that meaning?
Hmm. And once again, Pascal's wager, you gain a lot if what you believe is true, and you lose literally nothing if it isn't. Um,
Mm.
and like I definitely agree with like you're like you said, Descartes' assertion that there is an innate need to worship something. I think perhaps a more modern way to put that would be there is an innate seeking of a higher purpose and a higher calling. Because even if you live a completely self-absorbed life, you understand that your life is wasted if you don't do something that impacts more than just yourself. So if you take the idea of, a deity or a divinity out of the picture and you say, no, 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 like this is just the physical realm, there is no God, there's no, whether like, the sun isn't God, uh, Jesus Christ isn't God, was the Hindu one, Brahma isn't God, these different things. Um, you look at these people and they still find something to worship. Oftentimes it's either themselves through.
K-pop.
Hmm?
I was just saying K-pop or
Oh
Taylor
yeah,
Swift
yeah,
or
yeah. K-pop
something like
themselves,
that.
K-pop.
They are
Uh,
worshipped as actual
yes,
divine beings.
yeah, yeah. Celebrities themselves, even things like the environment, which is a really interesting one because it's basically crafting your entire purpose of existence around something that exists external to you, which, like we're saying with first principles, it's one of those things that is too fundamental to really be challenged because we have no idea how to even begin challenging it. Like, and that's one of the things that you were saying with giving an ancient Egyptian a smartphone is, we have access to all these technologies and all these sciences and things where we're able to convince ourselves that we have a perfectly objective and flawless understanding of the world around us. But the fact of the matter is we're simply making observations, and human nature hasn't changed. We still have the same faults and the same strengths and the same potentials as, you know, uh, the Greeks of the Odyssey, the people of the Middle Ages, um, the Chinese at the height of their empire. Like those human inclinations are always inside of us, and they just express themselves in different ways throughout history, depending on what the culture around them has developed to be an appropriate expression of that inclination.
Mm. There's always, it's why I actually believe in Descartes' trademark argument.
Mm,
That just no matter what it is, there is always going to be something that you worship.
yeah.
There's always going to be something that gives you a meaning and a reason behind what you
Hmm.
do. Even if you are a nihilist, you're still placing nihilism as your fundamental faith.
Hmm.
I choose to have faith in the fact that nothing matters. Like either way you
Yeah.
look at it, you either have faith that nothing matters or you have faith that everything does
Yeah.
matter. And it's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an excellent point. Um, so one of the things you mentioned in your faith journey was looking at Christ as a man and how he functioned in the world and the different testimonies and accounts of his um, existence. One of the things that's really striking to me about Christ in the Gospels is he is not a sigma male. He doesn't stand aloof to all the sinners and tax collectors, and he doesn't say I'm better imposter. Like, he came down to suffer. We see
I'm
him.
better.
Yeah,
I'm
we
stronger. Yeah, no, he probably wouldn't have had like a large section of a very important book for human culture written
yes,
about him if he was just
yes.
another Andrew Tate, but
Yep.
with slippers and sandals.
My God. Oh, um, but yeah, but what I was saying is like, we see him apart from sin, he acts like a human in every other way because, obviously he is fully man. So we see him sorrowful at friends' deaths. We see him angry in the temple. When he's flipping over the tables and things like
When he's
that.
kicking over those tables, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that's really come under attack in recent years is the proper integration of emotion as a man. And the reason I bring this up is because,
Mm,
you've written a lot of poetry that I personally think is, pretty good and very deep. And the
thank you.
reason this is so interesting to me as a concept is because men in general have gotten very bad at expressing and regulating their emotions in a way that is authentic and masculine at the same time. So we have the two extremes of like super weepy emotional guys that are, dominated by how they feel from moment to moment. But on the
Mm,
other hand, you have the guys that just completely wall themselves off from emotion, never want to admit to any of it because they see it as a weakness. But
yeah, the
obviously,
Stoics, the Sigmas, all
exactly.
that jazz.
Yeah. And so Christ didn't have um, an issue with that. And if we look back to, I'd argue all of the greatest men in history, they weren't just these blocks of stone. They had emotions. Like you look at King David in the Psalms, um,
Mm.
he has every emotion imaginable: triumph, despair, misery, gratitude, um, strength. There's so much expressed in those pieces of literature, but that's really been lost as um, as we've taken this very reactionary standpoint to
Mm.
kind of the way culture is going. So what I'm getting at is, what, in your opinion, is the proper way to regulate your emotional state as a man? Because you mentioned that a big part of your conversion was at your baptism, right, where you just felt that things were right and you felt that things were going the proper way. So how, in your opinion, do we regulate emotions where we give them the space and the attention and the validation that they need and deserve, but also not being governed by them or emasculating us or things like that?
Emotional regulation as a man in modern society is, I think that men have never been given so much freedom to openly express how they're feeling. And because of that, we have a lot of wrong answers when it comes to how should you open up as a man.
Mm.
In Actually, no, I'll tell you, a guy I work with at work, he's just turned 40. And I was speaking to him the other day, and he was going on about the HR team upstairs. It's like, oh, I don't talk about my feelings or none of that gay crap. I just, go for a pint with the boys down at the pub, play some darts, and, screw it. I'm
Yep.
happy, get drunk.
All
I'm
those
sad, get
memes.
drunk.
Yeah. Men would rather conquer Europe than go to therapy, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's a very generational thing.
Hmm.
For him, that probably works. Go down the pub, get hammered, play darts, go back home, sleep off. And that's it, Life's, you might be sad, you might be happy. Either way, life moves on. And
Hmm.
from what I got from him was not the best way to go about it, but definitely a way that works. Life goes on, shit happens, move on. The way he worded it was, oh no, I'm sad. Oh yeah, I'm happy. Get hammered and play darts. So that was eloquently spoken, but still the gist of
Hmm.
the point was that. But obviously, you and I, we've grown up as a different generation.
Hmm.
We've grown up with in school largely. I feel like in the health classes, the PSHE, physical, social health education, the like general covering of how you should be a functional member of society. I feel like a lot of those classes is teachers recognizing that people have emotions and they need to helpfully express those emotions,
Hmm.
but they aren't discerning between what works for individual people. I'm not going to say what works for each gender because I think it is very much down to the individual.
Hmm.
And those health classes, they're saying, oh, you should open up to friends and you should say everything that you're feeling. And for some people, I'm sure that works. but for other people, that manifests as just complaining and
Mm-hmm.
whining and getting themselves into a worse state because all they're doing is talking about their issues
Mm-hmm.
and creating a vicious cycle of.
Mm-hmm.
I went to therapy recently and I've had 3 sessions. The first session, whilst it was amazing to actually reveal everything about myself and tell someone else exactly who I am,
Mm-hmm.
there was very much the feel of by the third session, I need to keep coming back here. I need to keep talking about this stuff because I'm talking about it and it feels like I'm releasing something. But if I don't continue talking about it, then it's just going to build back up again.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to forget and lose the emotional education I've received.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in the modern world, like I said, you have a lot of options, perhaps too many options for expressing emotion. Throughout most of human history, it's been like it was for the guy I work with. Stuff happens. Oh no, move on.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been conditioned so much in the modern world to think if something bad happens, that's it. We need to
Mm-hmm.
go to therapy, or it's terrible and needs to be viewed as this huge thing that happens. But
Mm-hmm.
to bring it back to the original point, dealing with emotions as a man in modern society, it really does just depend on what works with you.
Mm-hmm.
What works with me is getting in my car, going with my mate up to Viewpoint, having a cig, just talking about stuff. Not in like a, oh honey, that's so sad, but in a like, hey man, this happened recently. I'm feeling
Uh-huh.
kind of bad about it, but I'm gonna get better, and here's what I'm gonna do. Making an action plan of the action you're going to take rather than just getting caught up in thinking, which is contradictory to what I said at the start.
Mm-hmm.
But
No, that's
like I said
really.
at the start, you need to think first, but action is so important because if you're just letting your emotions take control of you,
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to get caught in the cycle of just thinking, thinking,
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah, that's really interesting because one of the common threads that I'm picking up with your coworkers' approach and then your approach, I think you're definitely right. There is a generational gap, and so we've been taught different ways of being appropriate to express emotions. But at the same time, one of the common themes there is giving the emotion space to express itself and pass, but then not letting it linger longer than is appropriate or necessary. So, like
Mm.
in the example of therapy, or your buddy just playing darts and getting hammered, you're giving that emotion time to kind of breathe and fully process it and integrate it into yourself, so you're not bottling it up. But at the same time, you're not living a whimsical or an undisciplined life, depending on just how you feel in the moment, as opposed to keeping that longer term perspective in mind. And it is definitely true that different things will work for different people,
Mm.
but it is also worth mentioning that just because it's like how men specifically are wired, typically and again, this is a generalization, so
Yeah.
don't take it as necessarily gospel truth, but the way that we're wired is we almost inherently, not almost, we do inherently have this desire to feel useful and competent. And so
Oh yeah, definitely.
we often don't want to share emotions because that creates a perception of weakness. While at the same time, uh, we will only go and look for help if we weren't able to arrive at a conclusion ourselves. And so I think a big reason that a lot of men today have an aversion to having any emotional honesty and wanting to bottle things up is because they have this insecurity about needing to be on top of things at all times. And they think that they're losing their personal sovereignty if they're, like you're saying, being all weepy and seeming, needy and all these different things. So that's just another important
Something,
consideration.
yeah, yeah, that's completely true. Something that I completely agree with you because when I went into my relationship, I was very much of the mind I can't let my girlfriend see my weakness because
Mm,
I need to be strong. I
you
need
need
to
to be the
be
alpha male.
emotionally secure. I wouldn't exactly word it like that. No, but I need to be emotionally stable because there's going to be times where she's going to need to lean on me.
Yeah.
But there was things that happened, and you get into a relationship, and suddenly you have to be emotionally available for this person. And emotional availability means that you need to show your weaknesses.
Hmm.
So many men in the modern world are so caught up with the insecurity of having weaknesses that
Hmm.
they let their weaknesses manifest in ways that they can't control. You need to be emotionally available to be a functioning
Right.
human in this
Yes.
world. And to do that, you need to actually be able to show weakness. And I think what I was just saying was so many men are caught up with the insecurity of having weaknesses
Hmm.
that they let it destroy them. They internalize that weakness so much to the point that instead of being emotionally strong for, say, their lady or their friends or their
Hmm.
family, they're letting their emotions completely destroy them,
Yeah.
and no one's hearing it.
Yeah. And
No one is realizing that. So instead of it being a concrete issue of here's my emotion, here's why I'm feeling it, can we try and rectify this in some way? Instead of that, you've just got a man that is overthinking and overthinking and
hmm.
destroying himself because of it. And that's the real weakness, is the insecurity of having that weakness.
Yeah. I mean, that brings us back to our conversation about the internet earlier, is people, putting out these facades where it looks like everything is perfect and everything's together and they're completely at the top of their game. And that makes people feel bad for having weaknesses or shortcomings, when the fact of the matter is we're all human and we all have them. And you can think about
Mm.
the really interesting thing about strength is that you can, in a way, choose to be strong or weak in almost any situation. So like you think, for example,
Oh yeah.
um, somebody might be an Olympic track runner, let's say. You have the best, the best run in the world. You're going to be pretty bad at, benching and deadlifting and maybe not squatting, because that's, leg muscles, obviously. But depending on what strength you're training for, you are automatically walling yourself off from some other avenues. Similarly,
Mm.
if your first priority in your life is your business, you're going to have to make some sacrifices in your friendships, right? You're going to have some weaknesses
Mm.
there. If your family is your first priority in life, you're probably going to have to make some sacrifices with career ambitions, because you won't be able to afford to be the um, the CEO that's on call 24/7 if you want to also be present in your children's lives 24/7, right? And
Yeah.
so those are all examples of strengths, but even something where you look at something that is objectively a weakness, like being raised in a broken household without a stable father figure, wonderful. Like that gives you a strength that someone like me does not have, because you have the frame of reference to reach out to people and help people that are in similar situations, and you can relate to them on a level that someone from the outside just isn't able to do. And so I think it's very important to recognize that a weakness is only really a weakness if you perceive it as such, and you can find some strength or some benefit out of almost any situation in life. And even if you're, in a often a Russian gulag or something like that, like you read all these accounts, that is giving you a wealth of self-knowledge and personal experience. And yeah, it sucks, and life would be better if you weren't there, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a good that can be brought of it. And that also doesn't mean that there's anything necessarily shameful or wrong in having weaknesses, because, like I said, in making yourself strong in some areas, you are necessarily making yourself weak in others. And so then the question is,
Mm.
how do you surround yourself with people to compensate for those weaknesses? And how do you function in spite of them? Because if you have weaknesses, they're probably going to be used against you at some point. And you can't
Oh yeah.
possibly be strong in every area. That's just not how life works.
Yeah, that's a huge point about emotional regulation. As as a person, just generally, is you're gonna have weaknesses. You're gonna
Hmm.
have cracks in your armor where you simply just can't defend them. And a huge part of emotional regulation is having people that can fill those chinks in your armor.
Hmm.
Having people that, when your weaknesses are getting to you, you can go to them and be like, "Hey, man, this is messing me up. This is something I can't deal with by myself. I need your wisdom. I need your experience."
Hmm.
So emotional regulation is really just admitting your weaknesses and being like, I know what within me is something that makes me vulnerable. And instead of being stoic about it and just manning up and bottling everything up, I'm going to admit those weaknesses
Hmm.
before they start to hurt my relationships, hurt my friendships, hurt my family. And
Yeah.
like you said about how you perceive things, going back to that family analogy, if you grew up in a fatherless household or just a broken home in general, you can either take that in a negative way and use that as the outlook for all of your future relationships. Dad treated mum like this, I'm going to treat my wife like this. Or
Hmm.
you can do the flip side of that. Dad treated mum like this, so that's not how I'm going to treat her. It's all about admitting your emotions and admitting that if you did, say, for example, come from a broken household, that that is going to affect your relationships. Going into relationships saying, hey, I have wounds from the way that I was brought up that might manifest in this
Hmm.
relationship. However, I actively want to try and not get rid of them because you'll never get rid of things that have hurt you. But I actively want to try and be better than
Hmm.
the emotions that hurt me. And for so many men, it's just impossible to admit that weakness in the first place.
Hmm.
It's impossible to admit to someone that this is something that's wrong with me and that I need to try and fix it
Yeah. And
because they think if I just bottle it up and man up, then it'll go away, but it never does.
yeah, and that's why I believe that lone wolf mentality is so stupid because
So stupid.
it's not strength at all. It's just a refusal to recognize or admit your weaknesses. Like, and if
Mm,
if you think that this is some, woo woo nonsense or whatever, it's not. You can just look at the military as an example. You know,
mm,
they don't have a general and then 2,000 soldiers of the same rank with the same training underneath him, right?
mm.
It's you've got your generals, and then you've got your, I don't know, colonels, and then sergeants, whatever. I don't know, the captain, sergeant, whatever the thing is. But even within a squad itself, you've got your designated gunner, you've got your medic, you've got your comms guy, you've got your rifleman. Um, these different things because they're suited for different roles, and
Mm.
they're meant to focus in on those things in a way that is more detailed and therefore more useful than any one of them would be if they all just had a general knowledge of how to do these things. So yeah, that's really powerful stuff, man. Um, and like you're saying, people coming from a broken home, there's this allegory I heard once of the two sons of the alcoholic. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know that one.
yeah. So the idea is for the listeners, um, this father is just a super heavy drinker, hammered every night, not really present in his son's lives. He has two sons, right? The first son goes off and becomes an alcoholic and an absolute loser, doesn't make anything of his life. And when people ask him, well, why are you this way? He says, well, my father was an alcoholic. And then the
My dad
second
was
guy,
like this.
yeah, and the second guy goes and he has a beautiful family. He's super ambitious. He never touches a drop of drugs or alcohol or anything like that. He just attacks life. He's relentless, focused on being a good father. And people ask him, well, why are you so driven? Why are you like this? And he says, well, my father was an alcoholic. It's the
Yeah,
exact same
again, it's the same
excuse.
answer,
Yeah,
just the flip side of the coin.
it's just how they chose to use that either as a crutch or as a fuel. And that's the same for literally anything in life. Is you can take what happens to you as motivation or fuel or a lesson to really take you to the next level, or you can use it as an excuse to stagnate and stay where you are. Um, so we are getting toward the end of our time here. So to kind of wrap up this discussion, um, with everything we've talked about so far and just your perspective in general, curious, what does it mean to you specifically to be a man in the modern world today?
But that's a question I've been asking myself for 4 years going on.
Mm-hmm. Same.
I've had many different conclusions throughout the years, and even now I still couldn't give you a firm answer. My first conclusion was, being a man is being strong, being alpha, and all of that cringe
Driving a
stuff, and
Ferrari.
just driving a Ferrari, getting all the girls, having the house. But that, for me, just comes from a point of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
It might not for a lot of men. They genuinely might have the ambition to have a fast car simply because, I mean, hey, who doesn't love a Lamborghini? They look cool. They go fast. I like going fast. I like things that look cool. But I do believe that the majority of people that are going after that goal is simply because they have an insecurity that within them is, like we were saying earlier, a weakness. I think that being a man in the modern world, it's it's a difficult thing because it's not something that by Western media standards is praised per se. I'm not going to say it's demonized because it's only demonized in the extremities of Western culture, like
Mm-hmm.
Vice News or BuzzFeed. But it's definitely not something that is cherished enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I think being a man is knowing that you probably won't be appreciated for everything that you do, and a lot of the things that you do will go unseen. But pushing aside pride and vanity and wanting to be known as a good man and just doing the stuff that you know is right anyway, for me, it's ambiguous, but it's the straightest answer I can give you on what
Mm-hmm.
it means to be a man.
No, that's really good, man. I love asking that question because I always get a different answer. And it's, much appreciated because like you said, it's not an off the cuff answer. And like we said earlier, a lot of it is relative to the individual. So there might be
Mm.
guiding principles or generalities, but what it means to be a man for each individual person is going to be different. Some
Mm.
people, their expression of masculinity is going to be focusing 100% on their families. Others, it's going to be 100% devotion to, their business, nonprofit, serving their community, even
Mm.
something as simple as, coaching a little league sports team or something like that. And
Yeah.
so I think it is important to recognize that, yeah, like any like everything else we've said today is, you know, this is what has worked for you. This is what you have found to be true, and people can, take from it what serves them and just leave the rest behind. But awesome. Well, yeah, Josh, this has been a really powerful conversation, man. I'm, very happy to have been able to meet you and connect, and I've really enjoyed our time together. So thank you so much for
Mm.
coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Gabriel. This has been brilliant. It's been really fun to record.
Absolutely, man. Take care.
You too, bro.
And that concludes episode 11 of the Operation Paragon podcast. You can find Joss at Mind of Musings and at Hedon Akirian on Instagram. Feel free to check him out if you want to see his writings or poetry. If you want to get in touch with me, you can DM Operation Paragon on Instagram or email operationparagonpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, remember that greatness is within your reach.